Hi and welcome to the video. I'm here at a very sticky Heathrow airport, but I've just landed off of a flight from New York with British Airways, and you can see the video for that trip by clicking on the link in the description below. Now, this next leg was originally meant to be going to Dublin, however, because of a delay in that flight, meaning that I would have missed my onward connections to Glasgow, I've now been moved on to the direct Glasgow flight later today, so that's what this video will now be covering, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks very much for watching. Let's go. Now, I probably made that change of flight sound like a fairly straightforward resolution from BA, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Having arrived off my JFK flight at the B gates at Terminal 5, I'd made my way through flight connections and up into the main terminal. I'd been spoiled in the outbound leg with my visit to the Concorde Lounge, courtesy of my first class flight to Boston, but it was back down to earth with a bump as I was relegated back to the Galleries Lounge once more. The final leg of this trip was due to end up in Dublin, and then I had the return leg of a separate positioning flight back from Dublin via Heathrow and up to Glasgow. However, with the BA board showing a delay in my outbound leg to Dublin, and the subsequent return leg back to Heathrow, I was growing concerned that my 90-minute connection for the flight to Glasgow was growing uncomfortably short. As the projected delay grew to 45 minutes, I decided to be proactive and speak to the customer services agent in the lounge to see what options were available. I knew that BA would potentially rebook me onto a later Glasgow flight if the inbound Dublin flight was late arriving at Heathrow, but since I'd already been travelling for the better part of 24 hours by this point, I really wanted to avoid that if possible. It's been my experience in the past that BA are usually pretty good with accommodating changes when there's been a bit of disruption, but sadly that was not going to be the case today, and the lady who was in the customer service desk was definitely giving off strong "I can't be bothered helping you" vibes. Now, I have to say that this is very much not my normal experience of the staff in the lounges, who are usually really helpful and friendly, but I was very much getting the sense that my asking for some assistance in light of a growing delay was more hassle than she could be bothered with. She kept trying to fob me off and telling me that the delay wasn't too bad and that she wasn't showing any delay on the return leg of the Dublin flight, which would have been impossible given that it was scheduled to depart earlier than the inbound flight would now be arriving on the same aircraft. So there was nothing that she could do and it would all be fine. In short, go away. However, I persevered and eventually she relented and called through to the ticketing desk to ask about moving. Again, the way that she was speaking to her colleagues and describing what I was asking for, making no mention of the delay, but simply asking if I could be moved to the direct Glasgow flight, didn't lead to any success. In addition, despite all my flights being with BA and having been booked with BA, I was told that the ticketing office couldn't help me anyway, since this last leg was a BA Holidays booking and I would need to speak to them. Now, my understanding has always been that regardless of how you booked your ticket, whether direct with the airline, via a travel agent, or via a booking website like Expedia, that on the day of travel the ticket is released to the airline and that they are then responsible for any changes being made to it. That aside, this is the same company, or at least so I thought. But no, I was informed that despite British Airways advertising their holidays on their own website and having the option to book flights with cars or hotels integrated into their own booking engine functionality, that BA Holidays is, in fact, a separate company, and that BA Mainline cannot amend BA holiday bookings. I was then told that I'd have to call BA Holidays and ask them to sort out any changes. No offer from the customer service advisor to ring through to BA Holidays on their phone, just that I'd have to go and sort it out myself. Rightly or wrongly, this felt very much like it fell into the too hard and I can't be bothered category for the agent, but it was clear that I had reached the end of their willingness to assist, so I headed back to my table and called through to the BA Holidays phone line. Aside from the initial 20-minute wait to get through to an agent, the experience couldn't have been more night and day. The fantastic BA holiday agent I spoke to couldn't have been more helpful and clearly understood the issue I was facing. Within a few minutes, they had moved me from the Dublin flight onto the direct Glasgow flight and issued my new boarding pass, which I was then able to download on the BA app. It even meant that I was now going to be home slightly earlier than originally planned, so an absolute win-win in my book. The only part that the agent couldn't help with was cancelling the remaining legs of my positioning flights, since they were booked with BA mainline, so she suggested that I called BA to get those cancelled and refunded. Overall, a fantastic service from BA Holidays. So that was everything sorted and I was good to go. Or was I? Well, it turned out there was still one fly in the ointment left. Unknowns to me, when I was moved over to the new direct Glasgow flight, my compliance information, or whatever the correct term is for when you pass through flight connections and they take your picture to confirm you're actually at the airport, hadn't been transferred over to the new flight. So when I turned up at the gate to check in for that flight, they couldn't get it to recognise me or to scan me through the gate. It took a while for them to figure out what was causing the issue, but thankfully one of the gate agents, Drew, got in contact with the security team who came down to the gate and sorted it out with a couple of clicks on the computer, after which I was good to go. It turned out that the system had already actually offloaded me from the flight, as it thought I hadn't met the compliance check at security, and therefore that I wasn't at the airport. So that's something I'll keep in mind to specifically check the next time I get moved to another flight whilst at Heathrow. Anyway, despite all the back and forth with BA and the unnecessary additional stresses, I was finally on my way down the jet bridge for my final leg of this fantastic trip to this 6-year-old Airbus A321neo. With a warm welcome on board from the in-flight lead, Luke, I made my way back to seat 8A, one of 9 rows of Club Europe on this midday flight up to Glasgow. This was the same standard BA short-haul seat that I've covered a few times before, and as is the case with the majority of their Neo aircraft, these seats had no table in the middle seat in Club Europe, although they do still thankfully have a universal power socket and USB charger located beneath the seat. BA's newer Neo aircraft, like the one that I flew on the outbound leg from Dublin, are fitted with their newest interiors, and thankfully the middle table has made a return to those cabins. Once the doors were closed, menu cards were handed out in our rather full Club Europe cabin, and in a welcome stroke of luck, it turned out that I had one of only a few empty seats in the cabin next to me. Before too long, we pushed back and began our rather lengthy taxi over to runway 27 left. I had a quick look through the menu, which contained the usual offering of cold meals for a flight of this short duration. Our route today would take us initially west before turning northeast just past High Wycombe and then northwest after Northampton, staying in that heading all the way up until we turned just after Kirkintilloch for a southwesterly approach into Glasgow. If you're enjoying the video, please remember to leave me a like and subscribe to the channel to be notified when new videos are released. If you'd like to support the channel more directly, you can also buy me a coffee via the QR code on the screen or in the link in the description below. Service began pretty much as soon as we were in the air, with 2 cabin crew dealing with food and the in-flight lead following shortly behind with drinks. Unfortunately, by the time they got to me in row 8, my preference of the charcuterie plate was gone, but it wasn't the end of the world in such a short flight, and the crew kept me well topped up with the champagne by way of apology. It was a fairly cloudy day, so views of the ground were obscured for the majority of the flight until we were on final approach into Glasgow. Overall, it was a pleasant flight with an attentive and proactive crew, and one that I'm still deeply grateful that the BA Holidays rep was able to get me onto. I still think that it was pretty poor that BA's own customer services team effectively wrung its hands of the issue and didn't want to help, and the fact that they treat BA Holidays essentially as a separate company. If you have experienced anything similar to this, please let me know in the comments. After touching down in Glasgow's runway 23, we made our short taxi over to the terminal, bringing to an end what had been another fantastic trip to the US. I really hope that you've enjoyed the video, and thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to leave me a comment and subscribe to the channel for more videos as they come out.